Okay, so as good as this prison was for keeping people inside the prison, every 5 years or so there would be this fantastic jailbreak. And the most fantastic jailbreak in this prison's history was by this group of 4 guys collectively known as the Boyd Gang. So their leader, Edwin Alonzo Boyd, so this was in the early 1950s, so just a few years after the war. Boyd was a World War II vet, and so he found after the war that he had a really difficult time settling into his new life as a streetcar driver. It just didn't offer the same thrills and excitement of being in the war. So one day he heard about this autistic man that robbed a bank. And this really captured his imagination. When he heard about this, his exact quote was, "If it's so easy to rob a bank like that, then what the hell am I working for?" So he decided to recruit 3 of his friends. This guy named Steve Suchan, he was a professional violinist who ended up selling his violins for guns. This guy named Lenny Jackson, who was a hairdresser from Niagara Falls with a prosthetic leg. And this guy named Willie Jackson, who, of course, was a clown in the circus, right? So a very eclectic combination of guys, but collectively they became known as the Boyd Gang, and they started robbing banks all across North America, and until about 3 years later, they were finally captured, 3 of the guys, so Boyd and the 2 Jacksons, who weren't related, those 3, they were captured, and they were rounded up, and they were put here in the Don, in the regular cells. Now, by the time the gang had been captured, they had become celebrities. The public had grown really fascinated by them. They weren't seen as villains. They were seen more as like Robin Hood-esque anti-heroes, sticking it to the man. A lot of it had to do with the way in which they would rob banks. It was very similar to what you might see in movies at the time, the whole swashbuckling, jump over the counter, stick him up, put the money in the bag kind of thing. And also because Boyd was supposedly like a very good-looking guy and very charming and charismatic. So by the time they were put in here, they were the rock stars of the day, right? And so they're housed in the regular cells, but the Don soon found out that the regular cells just weren't good enough to house 3 mastermind criminals like, 3/4 of the Boyd Gang. They got out. Lenny Jackson had smuggled in a hacksaw blade in his wooden foot, so they used that to saw through the window, and in short order the Boyd Gang was free again. And of course this only increased their legend, their allure, the romance of the Boyd Gang. Because now the Boyd Gang had just escaped from the infamous Don jail, right? So they got out, this was in November 51, and they hit the ground running. They picked up right where they left off, they reunited with Suchan, they started robbing banks again all across, Canada, Toronto, wherever, until one fateful day, about 5 months later, so in March 1952, 2 of the guys were in a car in Toronto that was stopped on just a regular traffic stop. So Suchan and Lenny Jackson, those 2 guys were in the car. But because they're fugitives, they panicked and they opened fire on the cops, killing one of them, this guy named Edmund Tong, Detective Edmund Tong. He later died in the hospital of his injuries. And this was the big turning point in terms of the public's perception of the Boyd Gang. It wasn't so innocent anymore. They weren't just bank robbers like in a movie. Now they were cop killers, right? And after this happened, the police waged a massive manhunt to try to track these guys down, until one by one, all 4 of them were rounded up and returned to the Don. Now, the first time the Boyd Gang got out, it was sort of a PR disaster for the Don, right? So the Don jail decided to one-up the Boyd Gang by custom building a cell that they thought that no one could ever get out of. So they custom built this section of the jail using the same technology that was being used in Alcatraz at the time, specifically to hold the Boyd Gang. So if you guys want to walk in, you'll notice 4 cells, 4 gang members. Now you'll notice these cells are a little bit larger. The guards, the superintendent figured that, if they kept the Boyd Gang as comfortable as they could, that would be less incentive for them to escape, because it was very embarrassing when they escaped the first time. And you'll notice that they were